and Education Weekly.
Hey,
Morning.
look at Lisa. She's in there.
Oh yeah, yep. Always, you can count on her. Number one.
Yeah.
I gave up that position.
I don't think you gave it up it was forcefully done, right? She just came up through the races and then.
Yeah. But she was beating me all the time anyway, so that's okay.
Yeah.
All right,
like
boys,
she's
let's
got
get into it, man.
something
Everyone's
scheduled.
kind of been waiting
Let's
for
go.
Wednesdays. Wednesday's my personal favorite day. So, I know I was watching the show yesterday, Dean, and hearing a little bit of the nuggets on YouTube and things like that. So, I'll let you guys kind of take it over and let's get to it.
Yeah. Do you want me to kick it off, Jeff?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So of course the big story this week is the impending rail strike. Not surprisingly, though, we've got to this point after 33 months. That's the part that sort of fascinates me, is that we've been at this for almost 3 years in terms of negotiating this particular contract. And I talked to a couple of railroad experts yesterday who really know their stuff. They've been around the industry for going on 50 years as railroad economists. They put the probability at about a 60% chance that there will be some strike action. Of course, that means there's a wide margin of error there. But the thing that they said that I think makes this very real is that we've had decades of staff cuts. The railroads have lost about 30% of their staff in the last 10 years, I'm told. We've had precision scheduled railroading, which has forced a lot of operations to become much leaner. Staff cuts, I think, have left work crews overworked, tired, frustrated. They're at the end of their negotiating runway, if you like. And I think that's one of the comments that struck me, was that labour relations have never been this bad in the particular people I talked to in their lifetime, which is a long time for some of the railroad veterans. So there's something going on here that's forced the labour movement. And of course, we've only got 10 of the 12 unions, but the two holdout unions everyone else takes their lead from them. The thing that everyone's got to remember is, even though 10 of the 12 unions have agreed to terms, they've still got to vote on it. And there's no surety that the vote will go through. So railroad is that we need a functioning railroad in this country. Shippers need it, truckload carriers need it, dray carriers need it. We all depend, even though we compete with railroads on the long haul side and intermodal, we need them to function. And just the thought of having a railroad strike when our supply chains are still disrupted, I can't fathom the impact beyond trucking. I mean, trucking will do what it normally does and step in to pick up any shortfall in terms of moving freight that it needs to. But I think the broader impact on our economy at a time when we've still got supply chains in disarray will be just devastating. I kind of flippantly said on Monday, when someone said, "What do you think the impact will be?" I said it'll be polar vortex level impact, but longer. And polar vortex took about 8% of capacity off the roads in that 10-day period, but it took months for us to get back to normal. You think about a railroad strike where half of the volume on trains is intermodal. I mean, we were talking about before the show. Think about the 42,000 carloads of chemicals that move every week. Chemicals are used in every single manufacturing process. So the impact beyond trucking across manufacturing could be utterly devastating to a lot of folks.
Beyond devastating.
So we're at the stage where someone's going to blink this week. President Biden put in an executive order to force them to reach some sort of mediation or agreement by this Friday. That expires on Friday, and that's kind of all bets are off. And unlike other contracts, though, the ILWU contract on the West Coast expired on July 1st, so they can strike and do whatever they want after that. Unlike those, the Railroad Union, the Railroad Act, they have to go through a mediation process. I think it's called the Railroad Labor Act, if I've got the terminology correct. And it says that they have to. It's the Railway Labor Act, and it forces railroads and labour unions to adhere to federally mandated cooling off periods. And that cooling off period ends on Friday. So that's why we're at this position, and that's why the government's involved, and they're working feverishly. And I'm not hopeful we'll get a bipartisan resolution to this. I don't know that the the workforce are that in tune with that anyway. I think they're just fed up. And if you think about some of the punitive changes that have been made to their contracts over time, I could see why, locomotive engineers are really tired and frustrated.
Yeah, that's part of it. I believe the acronym is BLET, the engineering group that were steadfast, and they were like, we're not budging. This time we are staying and keeping that ground, and we're not going to move unless we get what we want. And that came from, I believe it was the president, what I was of the BLET, that I read something about it, and that in and of itself is pretty devastating because it's like they got their feet in concrete. They're not going to move. And the other thing too, back to what we were discussing before the show, I mean, 40% of the products move intermodal. And I read a lot from different sources that equates to about 460,000 truckloads. I mean, we can't handle that kind of disruption. There's no way. Talk about empty shelves, what we had during the pandemic and all of that. That's nothing compared to what's going to happen here. It's going to be beyond devastating.
Yeah, the survey that the Railroad Workers Union published, they had about 3,100 railroad workers respond to this survey, and over 90% of respondents said they would vote against any tentative agreements based on the recommendations put forward by the Presidential Executive Board, I think it's called, and would approve a strike after the mandated cooling off period. And you could see why they're ticked off. Some of the word arcane was used in a really good story by the Guardian, but at the heart of this, Jeff and Ryan, are labour cuts, lack of paid days off, reduced headcounts. The disciplinary attendance policy is for taking time off was one that really got my attention because BNSF instituted a points-based system where workers were allotted 30 career attendance points, and they were docked several points for taking days off, with points varying on the time of day and the days and the designated days that hit high impact days. Now, they could get 4 points back after working uninterrupted for 14 days straight, according to the story. But you can see why. I've worked in on-call businesses, and even though you're supposed to be at home resting, you're always on call. And that's what these guys are tired about, is it really disrupts their whole lives because they're on call virtually all the time and not being remunerated for it. What it does, it just leads to utter exhaustion when you're in I've worked in LTL businesses where you're always on call. And it just destroys everything because you never know when you're going to be called to work because you only get a couple of hours to be at work. It makes it very hard to plan a life around that. So there's some serious ground that's got to be given by the railroads who, by all accounts, have done pretty well financially in the last few years. So I think there's going to be a very interesting set of negotiations go on this week. You're right, Jeff. We can't afford this at all. Like, this is just something that's not negotiable, but I can't imagine how much devastation there will be to our economy if this goes ahead.
Oh, but how about this? What is the impact to the spot market and the contractual market if this does take? I mean, I see it really switching fast, and at that time, the carriers are going to. I think it's going to be a carrier market for sure, and they'll be dictating whatever they want on that because they know that the railroads just force them to pick up the slack, which they're not going to be able to handle everything, number one. That in and of itself is going to put pressure on the shippers to move their freight, and they're going to be willing to pay anything that they want. I believe so. So, I mean,
especially commodities.
What do you think the impact is going to be?
Well, especially commodities that have to move, that are replenishment stock ahead of holiday season. There will be some slow-moving inventory that gets caught up in the intermodal rail system here. The broader impact, of course, will be to all of the chemical carloads, the ethanol tankers used for biodiesel, the grain carloads at the end of harvest season. There'll be substantial impact across multiple industries. The truckload industry, I think, will see spot rates bounce right back to 2021 levels pretty quickly. Contract market's a different story. Capacity is still tight in the truckload market. Contract rates are not moving a lot. They're coming down a little bit, but of course we're in RFP season, and contract rates take their lead from spot rates. And what we covered on last week's show was that contract rates are starting to turn after about 4 to 5 months of spot rates dropping, which again is a normal pattern. Contracts lag spot, but the gap between the lag is dependent upon how rapid the drop or the increase is. If you have a shock to the system like polar vortex or like a rail strike, you will see spot rates go back up really quickly, and that will hold contract rates at levels they're at right now and maybe start to turn that wheel in the other direction. So it has the potential to really disrupt the market. I think the spot market, of course, is where there's lots of capacity right now, not so much in contract. I think the contract carriers have got pretty tight capacity because A, they can't get enough new trucks, and B, it's hard to keep well-paid drivers behind the wheel and away from home, right? Which is what you want. You want them happy and healthy and rich, well, richer. But what you want is also getting good miles per week and lots of new trucks coming into the system. So they're kind of in a bit of a holding pattern right now, but doing very well financially, of course, if you look at all of the earnings calls. Spot market's another different story. I could see, the exodus out of the industry in terms of capacity when diesel prices skyrocketed really were the power-only guys. Hard to quantify the exact number, but power-only really lost a lot of their bargaining power when that market quietened right down. You could see that spike right back up. You could see power-only guys pulling chassis trailers and 53-foot boxes all over this country in a heartbeat if that happened. So I think there'd be a resurgence right there. Capacity would certainly tighten, rates would go up. I've been watching all of the Norfolk Southern lanes on the East Coast today. I think they stopped receiving hazmat last Friday. I'm not seeing any discernible increase in hazmat load posts on the spot market just yet. I am seeing some upward movement in rates on lanes like Norfolk to Chicago. It's a BNSF lane, a little bit on Linden, which is Elizabeth, New Jersey, Linden to Chicago, Linden to Dallas. So a little bit of the 3-day rates, which are sort of Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, that are just coming into our system now. We're starting to see a little bit of upward movement. Our 7-day average rolling rate, of course, includes the weekend in it. So it's a bit hard to ascertain if spot rates are moving just yet. I would say that hard to say if it's just a day of week effect, because a lot of volume moves on a Tuesday and a Wednesday in the truckload side, or if there is something materially going on here. I think we'll know certainly by the end of the week what's happening, but we may not know up until the midnight on the night of the day that the cooling off period expires, and then we're off to the races for sure.
Well, I feel like we'll be waiting with our phones, right? Yeah. So we'll be waiting with our phones, right? Like as soon as it hits like 11:59, it's from there. From like a shipping aspect, like you said, it's going to come back down to 2021, and that's when shippers weren't prepared for it. Like even myself in sales, like having those conversations with shippers at that point in 2021, they were like, "Oh no, it'll be fine. Rates will come back to what it was," and then it slowly came back. But I feel, how do you feel? I personally think that if these rates do skyrocket again, shippers will be well prepared because they have that knowledge of basically 2 years ago. Do you think it still would be a slow crawl, or what do you kind of think on there?
A slow crawl in terms of how rates will increase or how shippers will react?
I think shippers reacting. I think like the bigger ones will definitely, because like we saw, like I think like Nike, they went and got like their own cruise ship for themselves when everything was kind of going on, right? So
they've lessons learned, right? So shippers have memories of elephants, so they remember very much what happened last year. So I think they'll remember exactly what happened. Don't forget, shippers are in RFP negotiating season right now for next year's, freight rates. They're already acutely aware of how tight capacity is because contract truckload carriers have had their costs go up. So I think they're already aware that costs are much higher. They're also aware that capacity was very tight last year, and as we talked last week, what they are doing is working much more diligently. They're using a lot more benchmarking tools than ever before to focus in on the lanes where they're not profitable and the lanes where they are profitable. And when I say profitable, I mean better than market average or worse. They're paying more on a lane than the market average. They're using a lot more tools this year, but focusing in on core lanes. And this makes complete sense to me because one of the stats that came out this week from remember, we've got about 40 billion of contract freight processed through DAT's network each year. So it's a sizable data set. 80% of the volume moves on 20% of the lanes in the contract world. So So when they send out a bid, right, why would you send out 100% of your lanes to every single carrier to get a rate when you know there's almost a guaranteed failure on a lane that's got one load a year? So what they're doing is they're being very clever about it, and they're saying, you know what, if it's one load a year or one load a month, and it's almost going to get a tender rejection, why don't we just let that go to the spot market and leave brokers to deal with that straight away? So what we'll see, I think, is a lot more volume go to spot. So I think to answer your question, Ryan, they're much better prepared this year with both data and expectations. I think they're very much aware of how much their procurement costs have gone up. Yesterday on our show, you would have heard Chad Kennedy talk about when we combine the rate increase for spot and contract rates are up 28% last year. And that's an enormous amount of increase that shippers have had to absorb. So yes, they're looking for rate relief for sure, but I think they're very much aware that the supply chains are still in disarray. Capacity is still tight on the contract side. And I think they're reluctant to change carriers because the cost of doing that is very, very high, as Jeff will attest. So I think the answer to your question is they are well prepared for this time around. They've had a few runs at this. I don't think they'll miss the boat here.
No, that's for sure.
I think want to kind of.
What's that, Ryan?
Sorry, go ahead, Jeff. Sorry.
No. Go ahead. I thought you were going to say something.
Yeah, I was just going to kind of get basically, so what we're kind of seeing right now from our end, right? Like if this strike wasn't kind of leaning towards, we'd be looking at things, holidays like Thanksgiving, looking at Halloween and looking at Christmas. Even for myself, I know my wife and I, we went somewhere on the weekend and we saw Christmas decorations already for sale. Do you find that, hey, if we see like something like this strike kind of looms on, do you think that last year, I remember you mentioned that some companies might actually miss these holidays with their product in store? Do you kind of see that kind of looming and the impact?
No, they're not going to miss that boat this year. They've got plenty of inventory in stock because that's one of the trends, right? I think a lot of the retailers are saying that we would rather have inventory in stock than miss out because the cost of missing out was far greater. This is money making quarter for a lot of retailers. Now, will there be some that will miss out that are just in time last minute orders? Possibly. I think there's so much inventory in our system right now. I'd be surprised if we see any shortages this time around. I could be wrong on that, but if the inventory stories and the warehouses being packed are accurate, then it'd be hard to say that we would see significant shortages this time around. But what we're seeing, though, is normal seasonal behavior in the spot market and contract. So take the strike away from things. We're seeing, rates decrease in Q3, which is, again, completely normal. Our rate forecasts have got a little bit of disagreement as to how low rates will go, but rates typically drop in September and into October, and then we'll start to see some lift ahead of the Black Friday, Thanksgiving period. And then, as I said on a podcast on Monday night, I'm not so much worried about this year. I think the next quarter of next year will be really interesting, excluding a possibility of a rail strike, right? One of the things I said to carriers is you need to make sure you've got January, February, and March's truck payment in the bank before Christmas.
Yeah, that's for sure. And to get back to about the inventories and the holidays coming up, I mean, as you know, from last year, a lot of that inventory didn't make the holiday season, and just imagine the storage fees on that inventory in and of itself. The thing that's a loss is the holiday that says 2021 on it or something like that. Obviously, they can't sell it, and it's a complete write-off for them. But the generic holiday decoration, so forth and so on, just imagine how much of that inventory that they still have on hand that they're going to try and push and probably discount it heavily this year to bring down those stock levels. I would think anyway, to your point, Dean, for sure.
Yeah, imports are still up. I mean, imports are still coming in at a record pace. So I still feel that we're in the tail end of peak shipping season. So, but we've still got a lot of inventory. It's got to make its way through ports. Now, 40 some odd vessels off Savannah is a pretty big deal. But when you listen to Georgia ports, they're pushing through record volume. So their throughput's good. It'll take a while to clear that backlog. So I feel like here we are in start of September. We don't have a lot of time to clear a lot of that inventory because the old saying is if it's not in a warehouse by October, you ain't making it to the the Christmas store, there could be a
Right.
lot of last mile urgency this year. So we've still got a little bit of time to get that backlog cleared. The backlog is nowhere near as bad on the West Coast. But volumes, the peers data came in from IHS Market earlier this week on imports, nationally up 4%. Compared to last month, so I think it's about 2.53 million. So still coming in at a pretty good clip. But the forecast is for volumes to drop off because we have seen a big pull forward of inventories earlier this year. The data point that stuck out to me was that volumes on the West Coast were down 4% month over month, but up 10% on the East Coast. So we're still seeing this west to east shift. That's still sort of rippling through the market. Still seeing lots of truckload volume coming in for carriers on the East Coast compared to the West Coast. Capacity is still very loose out there. And, one of the data points that if you said, what's the impact of a rail strike, it would be Los Angeles, Chicago spot rates without doubt, because that lane is tied at the hip to, and I'll quickly pull up the rate view rate right now. It's tied at the hip to imports, because 30% of intermodal moves move on that one lane. 3-day rates are down a penny, right? Penny per mile. So still no lift on that particular lane, because that's going to be a lane where things will pop if there is a rail strike and people need truckload to move freight, just like it did this time last year. Or maybe a little bit later, but truckload volumes were up triple on that lane in November last year when congestion and volumes were sort of surging. So that's if anyone wants to know what lane will be the barometer for an impact on truckload spot market picking up any slack, it would be the one. Some of the Chicago to Worcester, Chicago to Elizabeth, New Jersey, they're lanes that I sort of watch. Anytime you go east to west, rates are low anyway, because there's just that imbalance of freight. But anything sort of heading east, that'll be the ones I'd be watching.
Yeah. Now, talking about the ports, especially LALB, what are you seeing as far as the percent increase again into the Houston port, the Savannah port, NJ, New York ports? Are they still around the same, Dean? I know we haven't spoke about it in a while, and one was like at 24%, I think it was Houston, and then it was probably low teens for Savannah, and the same for New York. Has that changed a little bit, or are they still around the same?
If you could give me 1 second.
Oh, sure. Yeah, no problem. No problem.
I've got all the time in the world. So data points that sort of support that. Let me see where they are.
I'm just curious, because I know, we were talking about the decrease over in the West ports, and then now we're starting, we started seeing that uptick, and we were wondering at that time, are shippers getting smart and they're starting to move their freight away from the port of Long Beach and LA because of the disruptions they had out there, and they're just trying to play it safe, pay a little bit more to go to the other ports. I'm just curious.
Yeah, they are. If I could quickly look at I think Los Angeles volumes were down slightly this month. Let me I'm just pulling up the data right now. So Los Angeles was it was down. So 364,000 versus 490,000 last month. That was down. But Elizabeth, New Jersey, Elizabeth was the one. Or if I go to New York was 409,000 containers last month, 423,000 this month.
Wow.
So same in Norfolk, 137,000 up to 146,000 containers this month. So Philadelphia was down a little bit. It's mostly reefer though. Long Beach was 367. It was up a little bit. So the big port though, where the volume comes in, is New York, Houston, 166,000 containers up to 172,000. What about Seattle? Seattle's another one where a lot of volume. 58,000 last month, 49,000 this month. So definitely.
How about Oakland? Just curious.
Yeah, Oakland was 71,000 last month, 85,000 this month. So a lot more volume went into Oakland this month.
Oh,
yeah. So the big ports, 46% of our volume nationally came in from China, not mainland China in August. Those volumes are up slightly, obviously, but definitely when you look across all of the major ports, you can see that the year-over-year changes are supporting a move away from Los Angeles, Long Beach, and to Gulf and East Coast, more so East Coast ports, because I think there's more of them and there's bigger infrastructure. Plus, you're seeing a lot more of the Suez Canal trade coming straight across the East Coast and dropping here before heading
the
to other ports.
All water option. The other thing is do you see anything about the typhoons hitting Shanghai and Ningbo and all that? I mean, I've been reading some stuff on it. I was just trying to get your insights and what you're seeing.
Yeah, I only saw about that yesterday too, Jeff, that they're shutting down for the second time. That has to have an impact because of the typhoon season down there. We've got a La Nina in effect in the southern hemisphere, which is causing some pretty serious flooding in Australia, again, my home country. But a lot of those part of that is the cyclone season that whips up this time of the year around the tropics because of those winds that go. Unlike here, they go from east to west around the tropics, and the La Nina effect that sort of drives a lot of these typhoons or cyclones is the increased winds. Shifts warm water quicker, brings colder water to the surface, creates more rainfall. So it is that season down there. I'm not surprised, but again, that'll have a ripple effect. Yeah. But different in terms, at the start of the year, Jeff, we were talking about when Shanghai shut down. We're seeing the fallout of that now with sort of the congestion on the East Coast because peak season was pulled forward. As volumes are falling, my instinct says that we won't see much of an impact in terms of volume, right? Because they've been the one thing that we did learn from the Shanghai shutdown was that a lot of that volume moved just nearby next door to Ningbo. But if both of those are closed down, that could certainly have an impact. But we are heading into a time of the year in terms of US imports where they are trending downwards anyway.
Yeah, I mean, a few weeks ago, if I remember correctly, maybe 3 weeks ago, they shut down the ports out there again, and then we see it again. It seems like a common occurrence that's happening. So I'm sure there has to be some type of ripple effect that we'll see, whatever the disruption is there and the amount of time, I would think on the backside of it as it's hitting the U.S. ports that it would affect that as well, as far as the timelines are concerned.
Yeah. I'm just quickly pulling up the percentage changes if you're interested.
That would be great.
Because I think they would be more than the actual numbers. For some reason, I couldn't find that spreadsheet that I needed straight away.
Because I think it's good information, especially for the audience that are conversing with their customers and prospects. That this type of information would be very, very helpful for them, for sure.
So New York had the largest number of containers. It took the number one spot from Long Beach by about 50,000 20-foot equivalent units. That's kind of unusual, Jeff, right?
Yes.
Normally Long Beach, Los Angeles, or normally Los Angeles 1 and 2. It was number 3 this month, which I think is fascinating. It's the preliminary data. Preliminary data says volumes are down 26% in Los Angeles, up 3% in New York, up just 1% in Long Beach. Savannah up 13% month over month. Houston up 4%, Norfolk up 6%, British Columbia up almost double, Charleston 10%. So when you go down through the top 10, everyone reported gains except Los Angeles, which again kind of supports the idea that shippers had way back when they thought about the ILWU strike and the congestion in January. I kind of jokingly said that they're going to find any port not named Long Beach and Los Angeles to avoid this, and that's kind of what they've done. And we see it in the truckload side. We see it overwhelm these ports and hit the spot market. Although capacity is relatively loose, we're seeing some spot rate increases in markets like Savannah and Charleston and Norfolk, even Elizabeth, New Jersey. But it's got more complex problems because of the chassis shortages and the overwhelming number of empties that are choking up the market.
Yeah,
so,
they still have the congestion. They still have problems, New York NJ ports. I think I said the last time that I watched the pug, they call it, and the director of the ports there. Every quarter they have a update on it, and they're having the same type of problems as LALB with congestions and warehouse space, the same things, but yet we're seeing that movement coming from west to east, and I'm sure, with all of that influx of volumes, that all those ports are having same type of issues too, because, of those increase of volumes.
It's interesting to think about. We talked about, does it stick? I think you asked the question last week, does any of this stick? And you have to think it does, right? Once people get used to it, the ocean lines get used to those routings. You read a lot. I mean, Savannah, for example, are adding another. I think they're adding more. I can't remember the number of ship-to-shore cranes they've ordered. In addition to putting a lot more infrastructure around it, they can go from 3 to 4, 15,000 TEU vessels at the same time. So they're talking about increasing their capacity substantially into next year. So I think that what we'll see is, because one of the reasons that you go to the West Coast and then train it all the way through to Chicago or Dallas or Memphis is it's a cheaper option to get the freight to the Midwest or just east of the Mississippi. You could see that changing if they can get better throughput and good rates into the East Coast. You could see that sticking, but I think people are still remember the 2014-15 labor issues when the last contract was, and that's what scared a lot of people off when we talked to shippers. They were very wary of a repeat of that, because they know that once the contract expired, then go slow actions could be brought in at any time, even strikes. So they weren't going to take any chances this year, just like we talked about in terms of having enough inventory for holiday season. They weren't taking any chances with a potential strike on the West Coast screwing up their supply chains this year.
That's crazy to think about. And with that, I'm going to get into our data day lane of the day. It's going to be some pretty cool stuff here. So such a great intro. I don't know how Dan made that. That sets the literally on fire. Today's lane of the day is going to be from Memphis to Houston, Texas. The line haul RPM is $2.38 a mile. All in is looking at $3.01 with including fuel. Contract with fuel is looking at $3.18. Year over year, basically change has been about minus 81 cents. Just a little bit of feedback on it. There's been some upward movement on this lane after averaging about $2.20 a mile since June. Current rate is about 21 cents higher than the August average. And when we look at that, basically Memphis and Houston, those are some pretty important big hubs, right? So what are you kind of seeing for yourself, Dean, like in terms of as we kind of go through in that Q4 going into the next year?
Yeah, this is a lane. Memphis has a big inbound rail hub, right? Both from the west and from Mexico, right? So you've got, and they call it the logistics hub of the United States for a very good reason. You've got a lot of major interstates. It's a warehouse market principally. Yeah. They're not producing a significant amount from a manufacturing perspective. So it's a lot of inbound distribution, outbound all over the country. This to me tells me a little bit about what's going on in the railroads, because they've got a lot of ramp congestion at Memphis in particular. Certainly in Dallas, Kansas City, you see anywhere where we see inland rail congestion, we see spot rate movements on key lanes like this going up. So this, I think, to answer your question, this trend will continue as the rail congestion in inland ports continues to run unabated at the moment. There's no sign of that improving. So spot rates will go up. So some lanes rates will go up. I think this is what surprises most people when you talk about national rates decreasing. Some lanes, though, are the opposite, because with an average, you have highs and lows. So we're seeing rates go up on some lanes and down on others far greater than the national average. But I think today it's at, excluding fuel, at $2.47. That's up 30 cents since the August average. So that's a lane that I'd be watching very carefully. Houston capacity has been loosening a little bit. If you look at rates in the other direction, Houston capacity has been loosening. Rates have been dropping in the other direction. They're down 20 cents a mile. So rates are up 20 cents a mile one way, down 20 cents the other direction. So there's a little bit of rebalancing going on there. Houston volumes have fallen off a little bit. which is kind of surprising. It's been a very tight market, more so in flatbed than anything. Houston's month-over-month change was up 4%, so not a big lift in import volume there. That market could be cooling off.
Especially like I think I was reading a couple of days ago in Memphis, like the whole Nike fiasco, right? Like they had about 20 trailers broken into. I think it was like $300,000 of footwear and clothing that was just stolen, right? So those things have to be accounted for as well. And sorry, just get back into the. Here we got some. If everybody has any questions for Dean, let us know, because today is like the best day to arm yourself to talk to your shippers, your customers, and even your carriers as well, with all the information that we have this resource here. Sorry for interrupting, Jeff. Go ahead.
Dean, you mentioned flatbed out of Texas. What are you seeing like out of like Laredo, Brownsville, Texas, up to Canada? I'm just curious because you said that was down.
Yeah, well, no, not Houston to Edmonton. That's not Houston to the oil sands. That's up. Houston on our show yesterday, we talked about Houston rates being down as a market for about the fourth week in a row. But that Edmonton oil sands lane that I called it yesterday, rates are up to 320, up to 247 a mile excluding fuel. That's up 70 cents a mile compared to this time last year. So you can see that lane is sort of running very closely with the movement of infrastructure around the redevelopment in the oil sands. So that lane's busy. The busiest lane though, Jeff, for flatbeds is out of Houston. It's only a short haul lane to Fort Worth, and that's if you wanted to say what lane would I watch to get a feel for southeast rates in flatbed, Houston Fort Worth is by far our biggest volume lane in the spot market. And just like that, my system decides to go slow. I'm going to have to come back to you on that. Why does it do that? I've got a lot of screens going on here at the moment. All right, so that lane, Houston to Fort Worth. I'll just reload this.
Yeah, it's funny because I'm starting to move some freight out of Houston down to McAllen.
Yeah. Okay.
Flatbed, and then I got a lot of loads that I'm going to start moving out of the Brownsville up to Canada, Edmonton. And that's why I was curious about that. I mean, we're going to be up to about 20 or 30 loads a month, and we got 5 other lanes as well. So I was just curious about that. Yeah.
Well, Houston Fort Worth is our busiest lane. It's down to 344 a mile. So that's down 50 cents a mile since May. So capacity is cooling off on our busiest flatbed lane out of Houston. It's 344. It's about 20 cents a mile higher year over year. So comparatively, capacity is tighter, but it's certainly loosening compared to May. But you would say it's a tighter flatbed market on that particular lane. What was the other one was it McAllen on the border?
Yeah, exactly. Yep. From Houston down to McAllen.
Okay. We can go Houston. It's not a very big lane though. Is that a lot of export, or is it into that market, into that like north of the border for delivery?
Yeah, it's going to be. It's going down to the border and then the Mexican.
Okay. Again, rates. It's 347 miles. Rates are down to $1.77 this week, down from $2.22 this time a year ago. So capacity is really loose on that lane.
Yeah.
Let me
that's what I saw. I was just curious. Yeah.
Rates in the other direction are down also at $2.06. They're about 20 cents a mile lower than this time last year. So capacity is loose in both directions. The other capacity, reefer capacity, of course, is very tight across the border markets, whether you're talking McAllen, Laredo, El Paso. Produce volumes coming in from Mexico are almost identical to this time last year, but rates, there is a tightness of capacity. You've got to have the right balance of freight to get to the border market to load back out of there. So you've got to make sure you've got the right volumes. I suspect there's a little bit of a southbound volume shortage to get carriers in there so that rates are good for the shippers. But they're certainly going up in the reefer market down there, and not sure what's happening in the overall flatbed market. But that one lane that we watch, while we're here, we could certainly look at Laredo, which is I think, Ryan, you mentioned automotive.
Another big one, yeah,
automotive. One of the lanes we watched in this show here in particular was Laredo to Toronto. If you remember back to the cross-border strikes in February in Canada, Excuse my dogs barking in the background.
That's all right.
It's a delivery truck. Rates are down to $1.58 on that northbound lane, which is Laredo to Toronto, which is a lot of automotive parts.
Yes.
They're down, so that's half what they were in February. Half. So rates were $3 a mile. They're down to $1.50 today, but capacity is still a little bit tight because let's say it's $1.60 a mile today to go from Laredo to Toronto. It was $1.40 this time a year ago, and that kind of supports what people have been saying, and that is that about 20% of the drivers that were in Canada that used to cross the border are no longer crossing the border. That's funny, Ryan. I can see your dog reacting to my dogs in the back.
Yeah, that's why I gotta put myself on mute. I got 3 of them. Yeah, they're my little my little coworkers.
I'd love to
Pretty
say
lazy.
my guys are cute, but they're annoying. So we've got a traffic jam out here. We've got a water truck and then a big 18-wheeler blocking the street. So
Yeah, my guys,
It's
that's
all-
why I kind of like hide them away. But just coming back to it, like I know a lot of
Yeah.
like our viewers, they're some of them are building their pipeline. They want to know what they're going into Q4. And
Yep.
push me if I'm wrong here, but what are some of like the big industries that we could kind of get into? And Jeff, you could obviously with your experience as well, kind of get into this as well. Is that what should basically, let's say a newer rep, amateur rep, what should they kind of be focusing on that they could see that could have lots of volume going into Q4, going into next year?
I could have a swag at that from the reefer market. Like a layup's going to be anything to do with Thanksgiving fresh turkeys. I mean, it's always hard to find reefers out of the Midwest, out of Joplin, that whole meat patch. Fresh turkeys are going to start moving 3 weeks, before Thanksgiving. Reefer capacity is incredibly tight for fresh turkeys in that time of the year. So I think there's some markets where you could see some pretty good volumes. Produce season in Michigan is going to go all the way through the year end. Rates are going to escalate all the way through to January on that any lane out of Michigan for produce. Same in the Yakima Valley for produce season there. So produce season to me is a bit of a layup. Also, the other lanes to watch is once we get out of the salad bowl production of lettuce in Salinas, that's going to shift. I think it's in November. They shift to Yuma, Arizona. They literally will put the entire salad plant on 60 flatbed trucks and move it. Church Brothers do this. They move the entire salad production plant to Yuma, so the winter salad bowl will be at the end of that Colorado River around. It's not Mexicali, but it's certainly Yuma and that cross-border market right down there. So reefer market gets hot down there. You're talking about 450 loads a day. It's a big, because 90% of our leafy greens come from that little area during winter. So if I'm a reefer carrier, I'm watching for where our winter produce comes from. Yuma, Arizona is going to be one area that gets pretty hot. The other is markets like Philadelphia, where a lot of our imports come in from South America. So that's how I would think about the reefer market. And of course, if you get really creative, anywhere where it's really cold and a dry van shipper's trying to move freight that he doesn't want to freeze. Mm-hmm. So when you see the ambient temperature drop down below sort of +7, protect from freeze is going to be thrown on that bill of lading. So that's where reefer rates start to go up at a market level. So the cold weather can be a real plus for reefer carriers in particular.
Yeah. And on the other side, CPG, Ryan, for sure. Been in it for many, many years. Let's just call it 20 years. And, at this time of year, you can see a lot of movement coming out of like the Aurora, Illinois, big, huge warehouses out there that are pushing Pico Rivera, Anaheim, Southern California, where there's a lot of big CPG companies, Texas, another one, New York, New Jersey, big DCs out of there pushing to get into the Walmarts and the Targets and the Best Buys, you name it. Big time of the year right now for moving that type of inventory to fill up the inventories into the RDCs, DCs, and of course the local stores out there. So they always need help for sure. I've seen it over and over again. This is the time of year that you'll see a lot of that freight movement.
The other things, Ryan, could be anything to do with ports, right? So if you think about port disruption, any port backup, anywhere you see lots of vessels offshore, there's going to be a big call for dray carriers in particular to move that volume, especially for CPG, as Jeff talks about, anything that's urgent that's got to get into warehouses for replenishment. Markets like, Allentown, Harrisburg,
Yes,
That
that
market
too.
there in particular, it's like a massive warehouse market. Everything I buy on Amazon here in Boston comes out of Allentown, and
Yes.
that trucks are running overnight. So Amazon have got a lot of trailers. They're apparently taking up spots in truck stops, much to the annoyance of a lot of truck drivers who want a parking spot because they've got an excess of trailers, I guess. But there's going to be a big need for power-only guys to move those trailers and move a lot of retail freight this side of Christmas. A lot of short haul stuff. It's hard work running overnight on like 350 miles. That's probably some of the hardest trucking you'll ever do in your life because you don't get time to pull up and do anything when you've got to haul all night and try and sleep in the day. It's a tough gig, but the rates will be pretty attractive and you'll be home every other night.
Yeah, it's thanks, Dean, for mentioning the Harrisburg, the Bethlehem, the Allentown, huge mega warehouses coming out of the cornfields over there. I see it all the time. Prologis is a huge warehousing company out there. You see them all over the place. Central Jersey in the Cranberry area, massive warehousing in there as well. So thanks for the reminder on that. But you see a lot of outbound freight as well as inbound freight as they try to replenish the RDCs and the DCs in the local areas to get them out to the end users for sure.
Yeah. I think the flatbed's the other one we haven't missed. We've kind of missed out on. If you were a flatbed operator. It's a tough one because people aren't digging holes because north of the I-40, right, the ground's pretty cold. If I was, that's why you see a lot of flatbedders with headache racks pulling dry vans and stage music, theatre shows and things like that. But we don't get into steel production machinery import season until February, March. So that it's going to, flatbed, you've got to pick your markets. Probably certainly out in the west where things are warmer. South of the I-40 would be where you'd want to be concentrating if you were looking to build a flatbed business.
And I find with flatbed too, a lot of like customers and a lot of shippers, what they do is that they look into more warehousing stuff because we've had a couple of proposals for us, like, hey, can you guys store us stuff over the winter time, and then we can have that conversation later on, right? So you don't always forget about that warehousing aspect of it too. Build those relationships too, because you just never know.
Absolutely, because the shippers are still looking for warehousing space for sure. They don't want to get caught with their pants down around their ankles, so to speaking, like they did last year. So
well, and that's part of that's why lumber season gets very busy in winter because that's when warehouses do all their replenishment. So a lot of your winter inventory gets built up over winter for spring and summer sales. So the sawmills are going to get particularly busy. So if you're a flatbed carrier thinking about that particular market, Oregon, Portland, Medford markets up there in the Pacific Northwest, anything out of British Columbia. Of course, if you want to run out of Quebec, if your French is good enough, you can run out of Quebec. Those guys bring a lot of lumber. Northern Maine, a lot of empty miles though, hardly any truck stops. The scales are pretty brutal. They give you a hard time. No way around them up here in New England. So, but a lot of empty miles. So it's a hard market to work if you're a flatbed carrier working out of Northern Maine and running lumber to markets like Atlanta, etc. You've got to make sure you've got plenty of freight going back up at the right rate.
Yeah, another thing too, to tag on your back on that is that actually about 6 weeks prior to Christmas, you can see capacity start tightening up in Oregon as they start moving Christmas trees. A lot of that capacity is taken specifically for that. So things are going to get tightened really quick for about, Dean, right? About a 6-7 week period of time. It really starts tightening up. So, start looking for capacity. If you have shippers in that area, start doing the groundwork now and trying to find carriers, setting them up in that area because that's going to tighten up real quick. They
generally have a general rule that fresh cut trees have to be in parking lots by the Monday of Thanksgiving. So before Thanksgiving is kind of peak shipping week. They'll start about 4 to 5 weeks earlier with wreaths. So they'll do a lot of the shipping of dry van product to build wreaths and things like that. They start off doing the export containers to Hawaii and different locations. But then once you get into that week, the week before Thanksgiving is when flatbed carriers are going to be in pretty big demand out of the Pacific Northwest. That'll run all the way through the week of Christmas anyway. But the real peak is right before Thanksgiving. It's a specialized product. You've got to have the right gear. If you got a dry van, get ready for a lot of sap.
Yeah, definitely all the way. And then when you get to the first of the year, big time return season. That's when capacity too, when everybody starts returning everything they never wanted at Christmas time, and warehouses start filling up rather quickly on the reverse logistics side of the business.
Hey, Ryan, you asked a question about Q4, right? So we did some long-term forecasts last week, and that go out 12 months. Our short-term forecasts are, running about 95% accurate out 2 weeks. So we're pretty confident on short-term. Long-term gets a little bit fuzzy, but the long-term forecasts have stood the test of the last 2 years. They've been pretty accurate, and I think it's important to think that what they're showing is that the worst-case scenario for long-term dry van rates is still better than the highs of 2018 and 2019, and even back to 2017. So, and that kind of supports that operating costs are much higher. So we won't see rates, even though rates might cool off next year and go through various cycles, you're still a lot better than 2019, 2018 levels when you look at the forecast.
So like that's able to equip like sales reps as well, like to have that conversation with their customers, like, hey, it's not, things are bad, but they're not going to be as bad from there, and kind of be a resource instead of kind of being an order taker. Because that's why I asked about the industry, because I like to come and show with the mindset of like a new rep kind of coming in, and they got to get numbers on the board. They kind of got to figure out things, right? So you're going to get that volume, but at that point you want to build that up so that you're a resource and not an order taker anymore. So those are, from what you guys are kind of telling me here, it's amazing to look at geographical areas and then kind of like pinpoint there, like you guys mentioned, the different ports and everything like that. With that being said, I know we got a couple minutes left here, but Driver Appreciation Week, I think it's one of the most important weeks. Personally, I know Jeff, since I've been on the show this week, he's been preaching on getting on a truck with another driver. Any kind of thoughts, like in terms of kind of like the freight aspect of it for this week, like the impact, because from the pandemic, we've seen Thank a Trucker, we've seen all these kind of different things kind of come up. Is there been a situation where we've seen any kind of driver shortages with companies? Are they feeling appreciated? What do you kind of see in terms of the data aspect of that?
Anecdotally, when I talk to large carriers, their drivers never want to be home as much. They're making good money. They're pretty happy. But that's from a pay perspective. We did a survey this week. We published it this week. Said it was about 300 drivers. 17% said they feel mistrusted or hated. Another 34% felt like they were. I can't remember the exact title. The 17% felt like they were hated or mistrusted by the general public was not a surprise to me. I don't know if it's a surprise to you, but I've been involved in trucking since 1977. I can't even do the math on how long that is, but I can tell you that that's no surprise and nothing's changed. The level of disrespect that truck drivers get generally is appalling. Even last, just before the Labor Day week, I went for a trip in my truck, only did about 1,000 miles, and went up into Canada and came back. I got brake checked once, right? So why do car drivers feel the need to brake check a tractor trailer?
Good question.
For those of you that don't know, like, this is a new phenomenon. I never had it. I never had it in probably 1.99 million miles, but in the last couple of years, and I don't know whether it's social media and people want to get some TikTok content, or the pandemic has rewired people's brains. They certainly drive very differently in the last couple of weeks. Last couple of years, and people seem to do crazy things on the road that truck drivers really, they take offense at it because it takes so long to pull up a truck. So we should be showing appreciation to truckers 52 weeks of the year, not just
absolutely.
But
they take them for granted, Dean. They take them for granted. You got a couple years on me for the last 3 decades. You're right. They take them for granted. They don't do anything. So first of all, I just want to say thank you to my competitors and all logisticians out there that have been praising the drivers out there. I've been reading it all week. Thank you so much. We need so much more of that, because these guys bust their chops day in and day out. They're disrespected. Like I said, they're taken for granted. Nobody says hello to them. Nobody gives them a coffee. ask them how their day is going, ask them about the road conditions. It's all about knowledge as well. And when you can educate a shipper on the backside of the business where they never see, they're just more concentrated on their shipping, but not what the driver sees and what he deals with day in and day out. You would be surprised if you just had a conversation with these guys. Seriously, talk to the drivers when they come in, say thank you. Thank you. It takes you what, a second to say that? Seriously, do that. It'll gain respect.
Make the world of difference, Jeff.
Yes.
One of the things that even like the guard shack or the dispatcher in the office, just some sort of civility would go a long way, because what you don't see, and you can't expect people who don't drive trucks to understand how hard it is to drive overnight to make a 6 a.m. appointment. No, I can't ask people to understand that. But a driver takes so much risk and works so hard to get there. Just a wave, a smile, how's your truck going? How are you? That would make the world of difference. So it doesn't take much. Civility costs nothing, and we can do a lot.
Costs us nothing to be nice, and that's the one thing that we know.
Just be a decent human being, all right? Without these drivers, you're not going to make a dime, all right? I mean, you need these guys more than they need you. Trust me.
Yep.
And so when they back up against your door and you load them, thank you very much. Drive safe. I always say that to my drivers. It's important to them that they know that you care.
Yeah.
Simple. Very simple.
And it's like Jay said yesterday, like you with him being an asset carrier, is that customers that have that 5 to 6 docks, he'll have a better relationship with them rather than you see the ones that have like the 50 to 60 kind of docks, right? And if it just takes a little bit to actually be, and just like Jenny said, sorry, just like Lisa says here, just being human, it's just from there. What I want to thank everybody. I think that's a great thing to end off on. I want to thank everybody for coming on the show today. Jeff, Dean, it's always a pleasure to obviously be in your presence and learn so much. We are going to be replaying the show at 12 Eastern and then 3 p.m. as well on the social channels, LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. So check us daily from 9 to 9:30 every day. I know I'm doing a little promo here, but with that being said, Dean, I caught your show yesterday. It was amazing. Can you give the audience a little bit of information on your show, how they can catch it, and how they can get a hold of you?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Daman, for sponsoring the show. I just see you jump into the chat there.
Thank you, Daman.
Yeah, we're live every Tuesday, 10 a.m. Eastern. Ken Adamo and myself, we talk freight for about half an hour, answer your questions. You can catch us on YouTube. Just subscribe to DAT Freight and Analytics. Set up the alarm so you get the alert just before 10 a.m. every week. Thank you.
Good show. A very good show.
Guys. All right. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Go out and crush it. Take the gems that you learned today and go and kill it.
Thanks, Dean.
Centurion Trucking. Our motto is people before profit. Today's market requires more transparency, consistency, and focus on what our clients need to win. Centurion Trucking and American Logistics are poised to help their clients achieve and surpass their targets. If you're looking for a team that honors your needs, dreams, and aspirations, then get a hold of Daman at American Logistics or Centurion Trucking and start designing your career